What is a complete human? Is it a cover model? Is it a science geek? Is it a fitness expert? Or all of the above and more? Jana and Evan are crusaders that walk the earth looking at today's issues that touch our hearts and minds. The honest and hopeful outlook on the advancement of today's society. The science behind the decay of human relationships. The necessary preparations for future generations. Join us as we look deep inside ourselves and embark on a journey into becoming a complete human.
Obviously, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, air quality was so much better. So these are things like air purifiers obviously were trees 100 years ago, but with everything that we've done to our planet, we've kind of changed that. So, let's talk a little bit about how evolution and technological evolution have really impacted our air quality and the things that we really need to be aware of that we didn't have to be maybe even 50 years ago.
Yeah. So really simply, there's sort of two pieces to that, right? One is the pollutants that are sort of generated that are new that we're being exposed to that we haven't been exposed to over those many thousands of years of us evolving, right? But the other piece is also the changes in the context of our environment that have caused it to be more difficult to deal with pollutants that we would normally be okay with dealing with. And let me touch on that piece first, right? Because one of the things that's really interesting, one of the things we talked about, you talked about smoke, right, from wildfires, and you talked about and we talked about allergens, right? So those are two things that have sort of wildfires have been happening forever, right? Even before humanity, there were wildfires, right? And pollen blooms and all of these things are natural. They've been around forever, right? But what happens is that outdoors, you have wind and diffusion and these things that dilute those pollutants over across the atmosphere, right? So you may have an acute problem if you're immediately downstream of a wildfire, right? But eventually, that smoke disperses and then the air becomes breathable again outdoors, right? And then similarly with pollen, you may have an acute problem immediately, but eventually that disperses, right? But one of the problems is that since sort of the 50s, when we started instituting air conditioning, and then even more recently, as we've rightfully cared about energy efficiency and these things in our buildings, we've built buildings with tighter and tighter envelopes. So we let less air in and out, right? Because first it was so that you can condition the air, right? And then later on, we built it tighter and tighter because you spend a lot of energy to condition that air indoors and keep it at a comfortable level. And so you don't want to have to do that a lot, right? To have to keep conditioning a lot of air. So, those are all good things, but what that meant is that pollutants can build up and concentrate indoors, right? And to these days, we're spending more and more and more of our time indoors, and that leads to us being exposed to even pollutants that would otherwise might you might have some outdoors might get diffused. Indoors, they're building up to levels that are unhealthy for us. And then the other piece is just that we've started creating a lot of pollution that we hadn't been exposed to, right? Almost everything that's manufactured outgasses some VOCs. VOCs are volatile organic chemicals. What that means is that they're these chemicals that are used in manufacturing things like solvents, et cetera, that permeate these materials, and at room temperature they actually become gaseous. So they come out of that material and they get into the air. And so that, then you have industrial pollution, you have, what comes out of the tailpipe of cars, all of these things combining to make a mix that is something that's pretty unique in human history, like especially in the last 50 years.